flashbangs to disperse them. A TV news crew on the scene runs for cover after a tear gas canister lands directly in front of them.
There it goes. They're now firing onto the crowd. Out! They're firing rubber bullets.
Dramatic video shot by a reporter on the ground captures utter chaos. Police advance on the protesters, sending them running in fear.
Ferguson, Missouri will now forever be more than just a small city outside of St. Louis. It will now have an infamous definition to share with the fame of being birthplace of American aviation pioneer Jimmy Doolittle and Hall of Fame baseball player Enos Slaughter. The events of the past several days have turned Ferguson into the epicenter of civil unrest and the discussion about police procedures. And despite the best efforts of some to quell the emotionally charged atmosphere, nothing seems to be working, and the nation is watching. Let's welcome to Midpoint, founder of the Black American Leadership Alliance, Leah Durant joins us today. Leah, thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
I want to point out what's happened here within the last few moments, actually. At 11:17 Eastern Time this morning, the group Anonymous released what they said was a photograph of the police officer who shot Michael Brown on Saturday. At 11:55, Twitter suspended the account because the St. Louis Police Department said that it was an incorrect name, an incorrect picture that was put out for all the world to see. We also just heard a soundbite coming in of people saying the police were firing on the crowd, when in essence, these are flashbangs that go off to frighten people to get away from an area. It's not as if it's gunfire. Is this not all part of what we need to do at this point, is to everyone take a breath and stop for a moment, because the emotionally charged situation that we're in right now can only lead to more violence and potentially to more deadly shootings?
I couldn't agree with you more. I do think that, however, the system is broken. It's important for us to take a step back. It's important for us to examine the problem, get a sense of what's happening. You know, I don't believe these cases are anecdotal. I mean, I do think that there are systematic cases where we need to examine them. We need to try to enact some sorts of reforms to make sure that these kinds of cases don't happen. Now, that's not to say that all police engage in brutal tactics or in police brutality or excessive force, because we know that's not the case. But I do think that we need to enact reforms, and I think there are a number of things that could be done to make sure that we don't see cases like Ferguson, crop up around the country, which again, I think should pique the interest of all Americans. And unfortunately, I think oftentimes these conversations are couched in terms of black versus white. But I think these are problems that all Americans should care about. We should all care about if we're having an increasingly moving towards a police state, and it's something that impacts all of us, no matter what your national origin is or your race.
Okay, a few minutes here then. Let's not couch this in black versus white. You said there are a number of things that need to be done. Give us the first two or three that absolutely must happen right now and are doable.
Absolutely. I think we need training, and we need police training to help police to learn to de-escalate a situation. You just wonder what would have happened in this case had that have been had these tactics have been put into place. I think we also need training for the public as well, right? I mean, what would have happened if Mr. Brown and his friend had have just gotten onto the sidewalk like the police asked them to do? I think that's very important. I think we need standards in place to give the public more control over what is police brutality, what is excessive force. I think we've got a wild west sort of standard out there right now that varies from locality to locality, and I think we need to give the public more say with regard to what excessive force actually is. And I think we need to change the consequences. Right now, the consequences to these cases are very minimal. We only see 99% of cases actually being prosecuted in states like Missouri, only 1 in 3 cases federally. That's not good for anybody. So I think these reforms need to be put in place, and I think it'll be good for all Americans.
Would you not agree, though, and again, you use the word militarize, and many people use that when it comes down to these situations. I've talked to a number of people in law enforcement. The bad guys, and I'm not talking about the kid here, I'm not talking about the people on the streets, but the really bad guys, they have weapons. They have hardcore weapons that can kill an awful lot of people in a very short period of time. And the police say in order to be ready for these people to protect a neighborhood, we need to be more prepared than the bad guys are. And sometimes that means body armor, tanks, guns that need to be able to keep the peace. Would you not admit that's a fine line to cut right there, keeping the police from doing their job?
I agree. These cases can be very difficult. I do think that the police need to be equipped with whatever tools they need to be able to do their jobs. I mean, we are placing them in very dangerous situations oftentimes, and it's important that they have the firearms and have the tools necessary for these dangerous situations that we put them in. But again, I think it all would be helped by having these reforms in place. There was an interesting study that recently came out in California that said that 88% of complaints against police brutality went down when the police began to wear cameras. That's another, these are the kinds of reforms that once put in place could begin to address some of these issues that we see.
Well, I've got about a minute or so left here, and we also talked about the public here. Is that not, though, something that is not always addressed or listened to in many instances? Don't push, don't taunt. We understand there's a problem going on here. We understand something happened here that was wrong. But to do something like this only inflames a situation and puts more people in danger.
This is something that we see all across the country. And again, it goes back to that basic element of good common sense, I've got to say, and public education. It's important for people to know what to do. What do you do when you're stopped by the police with a stop and frisk or a Terry stop? I mean, you've got to understand how to de-escalate the situation to protect not only yourself, your family, and to make sure that things don't get out of hand. So that is very important. And again, I think that basic piece of good common sense and public education could go to do miles to make sure that we don't have situations like Ferguson around the country.
We're all talking about education, make sure that everybody knows what to do and not do the wrong thing. That's exactly right. Leah Durant, thank you so much for joining us. It's been my pleasure. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you very much.
All right, now let's go ahead and spin to the opinionator on this case. He is a syndicated radio talker with the Genesis Communication Network. Charles Butler joins us today. Charles, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Charles, your take then on what we have just discussed, that it is not only the police that need to be better educated, but the public that needs to be better educated. This is a two-way street. Would you agree?
Of course, I agree, but let's be very clear here. Police brutality has been going on against black men since Reconstruction, and the lawlessness. I'm a black man. I'm 62 years old. I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan, and I will say this. The police certainly know how to treat white people, so why don't they treat black people the same way with the same respect and the same dignity? I've had to deal with police officers lying on me my whole life. I remember my first encounter and the first ticket I ever got was for having my bright lights on in the city. Now, I got a ticket for that. Don't you think that's a warning? I mean, in those days, I had just gotten my driver's license, and the little button to turn on the bright lights was up in the corner, up in the left-hand corner. But just recently, the last 5 years, I've been accused of beating a white man with his cane and had to go to court and hire an attorney when this man had no bruises, no contusions, no marks on him, but I had beat him with his cane, and then they said I stole his cane, and the police tried to charge me with felony assault on this man. The case was thrown out of court, but I ended up spending a great deal of money because I had a great lawyer in James Montgomery and Bill Laws, two of the best attorneys in Chicago. Now, everybody can't afford those attorneys.
So now what is the answer? You've said, all right, let's go ahead and make sure that the police department treats young black men better. We've heard this now.
Not young black men, all black men.
All black men.
Davis,
we've heard this now for many, many years. So where do we start?
Danny Davis, my congressman here in Illinois, he was in a car with 4 elderly black gentlemen like himself, 65 and over. He was pulled over and harassed by the cops even after he identified himself as a congressman. But Danny, like a lot of black people, because the situation didn't escalate, he tried to drop it. And it was only because you had fighters like Jim Montgomery and Judge Pincham who forced him to file a police complaint did he file a police complaint. This happens to law-abiding, well-heeled black Americans all the time. All the time, not just once or twice. I just told you about one incident. I can go on citing the lies that police officers have told on me, just me. But I could I could get 10 friends on the line, and they'd give you 10 stories.
I got about 30 seconds left. Would you agree, though, as I mentioned to Leah, that one of the things here from the people themselves is there has to be a pullback, there has to be a breath taken, there has to be a way to make sure that all the facts are in first. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, I would agree. But the bottom line is the facts are in. And as James Kavanaugh said, who was a law enforcement officer for over 40 years, this police department is hedging on procedure. They're breaking routine procedure in incidents like this. And
well,
like
to be very fair, we don't have all the facts in yet because there seems to be a conflict as to whether or not the young man was actually in the police car or not.
No.
So we don't have the facts.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
You know for a fact that's not true.
I know that more people have given the same story than that story that you're telling.
Okay, well, the story I'm telling is only what we're getting right now from the police department, that's all.
That's from the police department, but from the witnesses, they all have the same story.
Okay, I tell you what,
And
Charles,
I would certainly
unfortunately,
take their word over the police department.
we are all out of time, but I'll tell you what, I would like to continue this conversation because I have a feeling this is going to go on for some time. I thank you so much for being very frank in your comments.
All right.
All right, later on this hour, the Secret Service that is secret.